Thank you, Mr. Dasgupta. Good afternoon, everyone. Distinguished speakers and participants. It's really difficult for a lawyer to confine himself to actually 5 minutes of speech. Anyway, I will try my best to somehow, work it within 5 minutes. And I'm also very thankful to Mr. John Thomre and Mr. Raghav for giving me this opportunity. They come on short notice, asked me to make a small speech. So I will confine my small speech to land acquisition problems and the land systems which are prevalent in Northeast, with special emphasis on maybe Meghalaya, because I have more first-hand experience with that, and Manipur and Nagaland, which have similar kind of land tenure systems. Now, as you all know, land acquisition has always been a problem, especially with tribal communities, because, for example, in Meghalaya, there are no land records for tribal lands. There has never been any cadastral surveys. There are no revenue records or any tangible revenue authorities. Now, when someone goes about to acquire land, the first problem they face is how they go about it. The government, in most cases, steps in and helps by acquiring the project area on behalf of the companies for any sort of project. Now, when that happens, a lot of conflicting rights arise, because even regard to ownership, use and enjoyment of the land that is delineated for the project site, that is not, what can one say, clear as who has a right use of it. Because all these lands, I know what tribal lands, they are governed as per tradition and custom, like they say. And so they're broadly divided into, as in Meghalaya, there's some private lands and mostly community lands. Now, community lands differ in Meghalaya from the community lands in administration in Nagaland and in Manipur. And over the years now, there have been enactments, there have been statutes which try to simplify or try to codify these landholding patterns. But even that's not enough. And coupled with that, we have new enactments like the Forest Rights Act, where being tribals and that we have a right to the forest and forest required for projects, now how are the rights to be addressed? And if I may say so, in future acquisitions or future acquisition of any land, the first problem, I think, before they start a project is to factor in the time it will take to address all these issues, from Forest Rights Act to the new act that's coming, which deals with resettlement and rehabilitation of displaced communities. There's a land acquisition bill of 2011, which is on the anvil and which may be passed any soon by Parliament. So, by not addressing or not factoring this issue, especially in the Northeast, a lot of projects get delayed. For example, even obtaining a quarry for quarrying or raw materials. So, in short, I would like to say that in the Northeast we have a very, very peculiar system. We have these new acts that have come, the national acts that have come into being. We have these traditional institutions which we have to deal with. We have village councils, village bodies, chiefs, and so on, darbars, as in Meghalaya, where we have to get NOCs at every level. And also the question of addressing the rights of the people who inhabit those lands, user rights, and other conflict of interest. So, with that, I would like to conclude my little speech. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry, but I'll have to leave the gathering. So, with due apologies to all of you and Mr. Dasgupta. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thankresh. I'm quite aware that when a legal man starts to speak, it's very difficult for him to restrict to 5 minutes. I'm afraid I was constrained to do that, so please do excuse us. Thank you very much. Now I request Sri Jayant Kawale to deliver the keynote address of the session. His challenges faced in the timely implementation of power projects, focus is on hydropower. Mr. Mr. Kawale. ठीक है, previous one.
I'll continue with the presentation that I did in the morning with only a few slides, which basically raise the questions that are related to this panel. We have a very eminent set of panelists here who can throw light on the number of issues that developers are faced with. So the environment clearance is basically a game of shifting goalposts. What happens is that when you finally approach the Ministry for Environment Clearance, new demands come on the project developers for new studies. Basically, the procedure is that when you initially approach the ministry, they issue terms of reference. They tell you exactly what is to be studied. You study that. And after completing all your study, you approach the ministry again asking for environment clearance, and a set of fresh studies is now asked for. So you have wasted a couple of years, and down the line, some more studies which will take another couple of years is asked for. For instance, the issue of cumulative basin impact assessment study, which earlier was not being insisted upon, but now we are finding that in some projects, the ministry is asking for these studies. If it was included in the TOR, then the developer would have done whatever was to be done. But at the end of that long process of having completed the studies, if you ask for a fresh set of studies, it unnecessarily takes time. So from the developer side, the suggestion was that whatever you want to have studied, you put it all in the TOR so that we study everything and come to you. But don't shift the goalposts, don't ask for fresh studies. In the morning session, Mr. Khosla mentioned about the environment flow. Yes, this is very important, and as developers we are perfectly aware that we should not cause disturbance on downstream environment to such an extent that disruption takes place. But unfortunately there is no scientific method for arriving at the environment flow. This issue of environment flow started with the government of Himachal Pradesh insisting on some 10 to 15% water to be what the technicians called spilled, but what from the environment point of view you would say would be environment flow. But over the years this 15% has now become 30%. Now why 30%? There is no real satisfactory explanation. But it seriously impacts not only the project viability, but also the DPR has to be freshly made in some cases. Because if you have to release 30% water, then your machine configurations will change, the head will change, the hydrology basically of the dam is undergoing a change. So you will need to make changes in your DPR, and for that again you will have to approach the CE, etc. So to avoid this situation from happening, if a more clear definition of environment flow is given, a methodology is given, which everybody can knows and can follow, then it will help everybody. We are certainly not interested in damaging the environment. We certainly want to remain within the parameters of whatever has been given by MOEF, but the rules of the game have to be clear and they need to be stated upfront. Another procedural aspect is that Ministry has now started insisting that the forest clearance application should be done simultaneously with your environment application, that is before getting TOR. Now unfortunately it's become a vicious cycle, because unless you get TOR you cannot go to the land and investigate, because for getting into the forest area and doing whatever little damage that needs to be done when you're drilling, making drifts, etc., TOR is the first document that you must have. Now, unless you do these investigations, you don't know where exactly the project is going to be, where the dam is going to be, how the submergence is going to be, and then only you can know which forest you're going to you're going to ask for forest clearance. So it's a chicken and egg story. Unless you have the TOR, you can't do survey and investigation. Unless you have survey and investigation, you don't know which forest you're going to ask for. So how do you give forest clearance application before getting TOR? So this needs to be looked at. The Ministry of Environment unfortunately did not consult anybody before making this mandatory. There needs to be a dialogue so that these practical difficulties can be sorted out. Now, Mr. Thankyu mentioned about the Forest Rights Act. Today there is no clarity, at least in Arunachal Pradesh, whether Forest Rights Act is applicable to community forests. Because the community has rights and privileges in those forests which need to be defined. So there is no clarity on that either. And since rights and privileges are to be protected and to be compensated for, whether Forest Rights Act will be applicable on top of that is an issue that people, at least in the forest department, are not clear about. So there's need to be clarity. In Arunachal Pradesh, and I suppose many other states in the northeastern region, 85% of the state land is forest. So where do you get land for compensatory afforestation? I believe there are lands with degraded forest which can be given, but I don't know if a land bank has been created so that you can quickly get land for compensatory afforestation. Otherwise, you will end up acquiring two sets of lands, one for the project and one for the compensatory afforestation, which needs to be avoided. There have been cases of double payment on forest land also. You pay the forest department and the community also insists on getting paid for the same land. For example, the Turiel project, there's somebody from NIPCO. Turiel project got bogged down for more than 5 years, basically on this issue. Payment was already made to forest department. People said this is our land, so we also need to be compensated for the same land. And as a public sector undertaking, NIPCO obviously could not do. I know of certain cases, private developers who have paid for the same land twice. That is avoidable and it should be avoided. Now the Forest Advisory Committee is an overloaded body. If they want to go through the entire process properly, yes, they should by all means do so. But then the time taken for doing all that is phenomenally long. Why can't we have a separate committee for the Northeast, which will reduce their burden? We are not saying dilute anything. We are only saying that whatever you want to study it more quickly. Put more people. I'm sure in a big country like ours, we certainly can find more than 3 forest experts who can go into these questions. Now, land records in many states are patchy or non-existent. State governments allot projects. At the time of allotment of projects, if they start creating the land records, later on the time taken to create land records will be saved. And the developers will be able to save that much time, because you prepare DPR and then the land records get created, it takes time. Now the proposed land acquisition bill, it says that 80% consent has to be obtained. No, hydro projects are not like other projects which could be shifted, like a thermal project, let's say. You select land, and if you don't get consent from 80% people, you can shift the project to some other location. That is not possible in a hydro project. It's highly location specific. You are given 2 levels by the state government. Within those 2 levels, you have to site your project. There's very little leeway for shifting the project upstream or downstream. If you can't get 80% consent from the local landowners, then you don't do the project according to the new bill, which will be unfortunate because the number of people affected may be very small and the benefits to the community at large may be very, very big. So we need to make a balance between what the local people desire and what is desirable from the larger social interest. And in any case, if this becomes law, then the state government should obtain such clearance before allotting projects, because otherwise the developers will go through the entire process, long process and costly process of preparing DPR only to know that 80% people have not given consent. So then all that expenditure and time will be wasted. Infrastructure is a challenge for developers, but I think it's an opportunity for governments because projects will generate huge amount of demand for infrastructure, on the back of which infrastructure projects like, let's say, river ports or telecommunications, even railways can ride. In one of the projects that we are developing, the movement of cement is going to be 20 lakh tons, steel is going to be 2 lakh tons. For any infrastructure provider, these are huge numbers, and any project of infrastructure can get justified on the basis of this kind of demand. But today, developers are forced into developing these ancillary infrastructures also, like let's say telecommunications. When we approach BSNL, they say, okay, we'll put up a tower, but pay for it. So we are again going to pay twice. We'll pay for the tower and we'll also pay for the services. That, in my opinion, is unfair because infrastructure is to be used by everybody. Project developers certainly will pay user charges, but expecting them to set up the entire infrastructure is putting unnecessary burden on the project, and it is inherently unfair. So I think all infrastructure providers need to look at the projects that are coming up, plan their infrastructure. Maybe we could have an MOU with the organizations that we will provide this much quantum of traffic based on which the projects can get justified. So I think this will be a win-win situation both for infrastructure providers as well as project developers and the community at large. Now there are certain specific issues like flood moderation, for instance. People in Assam are certainly demanding, and rightly so, that flood moderation, wherever possible, flood moderation provision should be made. But today, there is a lack of clarity as to who is going to pay for this. According to CERC tariff setting regulations, non-power components cannot be included for tariff purposes. So non-power components are to be paid for, like drinking water, irrigation, flood moderation, by the beneficiary states. But I do not think that in the situation that we have, where the project is located in Arunachal Pradesh and the flood moderation benefit is going to Assam, whether any of these two states will either be in a position or would be prepared to pay for this cost. So some scheme has to be formulated by Planning Commission or Government of India, Water Resources Ministry, to pay for these non-power components. Otherwise, it will be an unnecessary burden, not on the project developer, but on the ultimate consumer, who is not the beneficiary. If that power is sold to, let's say, Punjab, he will say, why should I pay for flood moderation in Assam? I will pay for power, otherwise I will go for thermal power, which is cheaper and which does not have to bear this additional cost. I think this needs to be looked at, and particularly for the Northeast, I think some consideration should be shown, and this additional cost should be paid for. Thank you.
I have got something to say to this Abbas Khan. What is the dictionary meaning of the forest?
Hello? Who is
What is the dictionary meaning of the forest?
Sorry?
Last few months back, we had another seminar. Dictionary meaning could not be arrived at for the forest. So before DPR or PO or whatever is writing, we should establish the dictionary meaning of the forest. Otherwise, many practical problems are going on.
Would you like to answer it, Mr. Kawale?
Actually, I would like to know the answer to this question myself, because if you go to the Supreme Court ruling and if you go to the Forest Conservation Act, at least I have not found any definition of forest. A forest is something that the forest officer will designate as forest, it looks like, which is not a very satisfactory definition. But if there is somebody in the audience who can answer this question, I will be very happy.
Sir, may I request you to kindly restrict the questions later on? We would like to continue with the session. Please, if you bear with us. A bit of news from the Test cricket which is going on in Eden Gardens in Calcutta. Some of you might be interested. India are batting 172 for 4, 58 overs, Tendulkar 45 and Yuvraj Singh 14. They lost 4 wickets, 172 for 4. I'll try and keep you updated during the end of the program today because we're interested to know. You know, the big projects, the hydro projects particularly, even in thermal projects, it's been my experience also, one of the main reasons why the project goes into time overrun, which becomes cost overrun, is the uncertainty of movement of materials. Materials do not come on time, whether it is by sea, by air, by road or by rail. So logistics become a very, very important issue in case of power project, and particularly so in Northeast, where logistics will become a big issue. So here we have with us Mr. N.K. Sachan, Chief Freight Transport Manager of Northeast Frontier Railway. He's going to throw some light as to how the logistics problem can be sorted out in implementing power projects on time in Northeast India.
Not have something, but chalega. So, ladies and gentlemen, so I've been requested to be short. Anyway, I was planning to be very short. So,
Your time is over actually.
my time. So I can say thank you. Okay. So I will touch very briefly because only specific thing. I think this is also saying that I should not start this presentation. So what I would say when we talk about any states, the presence of railway network within the Assam is quite good. The reason is very simple. We have got a much better and rail-friendly terrain in the Assam area, whereas the other states, our presence is almost not there. If you go by the route kilometers, we have got in Assam about 1,470 kilometers of broad gauge and 988 kilometers of meter gauge. Tripura is 151, which again has got a terrain which is relatively okay. It's come. This is basically the distribution of rail network. You will see that Assam area is having both on the north and the south bank of the Brahmaputra, we have got sufficient rail network. This gives you an overall idea, I think. This is again NF Railway, Bihar, Bengal, Assam. Assam we have got lot of terminals. So for any type of equipments which are supposed to come for thermal power station or for hydro power, there should not be problem. At present, because Rangia Murkongs Lake section is blocked for conversion, that problem may be there till December 2014. After that, that line will also be okay. This gives some idea about the traffic we will deal on NF Railway. This details, I think, will not be of interest to you. This is what is of interest to you. What I said is that our presence in Mizoram, Manipur, Arunachal, Meghalaya is almost not there. So let me first take the new project lines. So Dudhnai, Mendi Pathar, Meghalaya. This is 20 kilometers, this thing, new track. Most probably by June 2013 it should be over. Tetalia, Barnihart, we were planning to finish it by Tetalia, Barnihart, March 2015, but we are facing a lot of land acquisition. I think it is 2014 now. This is uncorrected version of this. The final presentation is not opening. But again, we are having Barnihart land acquisition problem. Barnihart, Shillong is again an approved work, but there is a problem of agitation. Murkong Lake, Pasighat, this is Arunachal Pradesh. This will take time. It is in survey stage. Harmoti Nahar Lagoon. This may be of interest for this hydro projects. This is expected to be completed by March 2014. Then Dimapur Kohima. This is also in initial stages. 2017 maybe is the target. Jiribam Tupol 2015. Jiribam Tupol, Imphal is Manipur. Bogibeel project is very important project which will connect the north and south bank at Dibrugarh. This again will be somewhere in 2015-16. Agartala Sabroom, Tripura. This is targeted for 2000. This is to Bangladesh. This is a PPP project. And Sevak Rangpo is in Sikkim. This project is also going to come in 2015-16. As that slide is not, I will just give you an idea. I think it will interest you. What is the type of cost these projects are having? That slide is not opening, I will tell you. One thing is left out. Just one slide. This is also important. These are two gauge conversion projects which will change the total scenario of transportation on NF railway. One is Rangya Murkong Lake, which was meter gauge line. It has been blocked for conversion, and that will be completed March 13 will be up to Tejpur, and after that in March 14 for rest of the section, and March or December it will take Rangapala, Lakhimpur and Murkong Lake, that final leg. Lamding Badarpur is taking a lot of time. There are a lot of problems of terrains and law and order. So that we are hoping that by September 14th we will be blocking for 6 months and completing the project. This is also the project which is of interest to the people. Now the type of cost which we incur in this, Rangya Murkong Lake section is 510 kilometers. The cost is 17 crores. 1717 crores. Lamding Badarpur section, its conversion is 368. The cost is 4,254 crores. It also involves some alignment changes so that new tunnels have to be made, bridges have to be made. Then Kartakal to Bhairavi is also included in this project. 84 kilometers, 223 crores. You will see as the terrain is more hilly, the cost goes exorbitantly high for the project for railways. Dudhnai, Mendipur is 178 crores. Tetalia, Barnihart 385 crore. Barnihart, Shillong is 4,083 crores. Dimapur, Kohima 850 crores. Bogibeel 3,230 crores. Now I was just giving you an indication that these are all high cost projects when it comes to railway infrastructure, And all said and done, in spite of many of them being national projects to be funded by Government of India on priority, the funds remain constrained. They are still constrained. The funds are not coming in spite of focus on northeastern area for development of rail project. So fund become a constraint. The second is land acquisition. We are facing a lot of problem on land acquisition. Third, of course, is the general law and order problem. And environment clearance is also the issue with railways, as was being pointed out for the hydro projects. So that with these constraints, we are trying to increase the network on NF Railway. But I suppose that existing network clubbed with the existing roadways should be reasonably good for the logistics of developing the power projects here. As far as hydro goes, only thing is required is the cement, steel and other equipments which have to come. For thermal power station, it's a regular supply of coal which is required. For both the things, NF Railway is geared up, and I think within 5-6 years, with all these projects coming up, all the states will be covered, and there should be no problem as far as the transportation of your machineries as well as the raw material is concerned. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sachan. We will now request Mr. Kinsing, Director Transmission and Transformation, MECL, to say a few words.
Chairman of the function and my fellow speaker in the dais and all friends. Actually, I'm very glad that the chairman of the function said that you limit yourself to 5 minutes, because I don't have much to say also on this occasion, especially because I'm the Director of Transmission of Meghalaya Power Transmission Corporation Limited, which has just been born just 9 months ago. But anyway, at least we have been born. This IPP have not yet been born. So you see, what is happening right now is that our corporation is still in a very infant stage, and I know that it is a very important corporation because it is the STU, which is the link between the generator and the distributor. And so without the STU, the generator will be nowhere. So anyway, I want to assure the power producer that we are gearing up to meet the challenge, because our corporation is still in the infancy stage. Though everything around us are okay, the regulators are quite mature and they are very active. The government is fine, like what you have ever heard. So I want to share one more thing here. So everybody has all spoken about the challenge for implementation of any project, power project or any project for that matter, in the state of Meghalaya and also elsewhere, and more importantly in our state, is definitely this land acquisition. When I joined as a director here, I wanted to see what are the projects which are still not completed. Then I found out that there are 4 or 5 projects which are not completed for more than 3-4 years. The only reason here is land acquisition. And land acquisition is a thing where we can only point out, and then the whole process of actually doing the acquisition of the land is done by the government. So, but whenever we have to attend any meeting on the review, we are the only one who have always been questioned, you expedite it. But actually we have got no power whatsoever to expedite it. So at this juncture, I would like to request this forum to at least record that I feel that it may be necessary that if there is some kind of empowered committee set up by the state government to deal only into this land acquisition and right-of-way problem for any developmental infrastructure development in the state. Because leaving it to the different departments, or even for that matter, even to the power producer alone, I think it is a big task. So this is, for all speakers I think have touched upon this thing, and I would like to suggest that maybe if you feel it is good enough, you kindly incorporate in your minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kinsing. That was very crisp and sharp. and we heard you. I'm sure Meghalaya government will do something to help you in land acquisition, because how can a company like yours exist, if there's problem in land acquisition? Land is the first thing you should be able to acquire without the minimum possible time. May I now request Sri J.P. Singh, Superintendent Engineer, Brahmaputra Board, to say a few words to us.
Respected Chairperson of the session, distinguished speaker on the dais, distinguished participants, good afternoon to all of you. I will touch upon the subject downstream impact, which was highlighted in the initial session as well. Any river valley project will mean intervention with the flow in the stream. Same is the case with a hydropower. When there is an intervention in the stream, there will be change in pattern of flow downstream because of that intervention. This intervention, sometimes it is beneficial, sometimes it has adverse effect. Now in hydropower, there could be two kind of project, one in the form of reservoir, another run of the river. The modification in the downstream flow by a reservoir gives a advantageous situation. It creates a better flow pattern in the downstream because the lean period flow is increased, the peak flow is moderated, so downstream people get benefit in terms of moderation in the flood, betterment in navigational facility because water availability is more. Then this fishery side also, it gives a certain aspect to develop that. For irrigation purpose, the availability of water throughout the year is distributed in an equitable way. So this reservoir project doesn't have much of problem in the downstream. But when we talk of this run of the river most of the run of the river projects, picking kind of thing, day-to-day basis there is a large variation in the flow. For a small period of time in 24 hours of the day, it will have almost bank full discharge, and rest of the time it will have very little discharge. So this causes, when it is flowing at bank full, it saturates the bank. Suddenly there is a drawdown, water goes down. So this soil on the both bank which are already saturated, that becomes heavier, its resistance is lost, and so it tends to get eroded away. So erosion problem in such a scheme is likely in the downstream, and it does need to be attended to. It also interferes with any irrigation project which has been conceived or planned in downstream, which has not yet come up, but if it has been conceived or it is planned, then it will interfere with that project also. So while planning a run of the river project or it's a releases, we do need to take into account such projects and the requirement of the water for that project that must be ensured through the releases from that project. Brahmaputra board has already prepared master plans for most of the major rivers in northeastern region. So some of the problems which I am just mentioning which can come from this river valley projects if the master plan is taken into account at the planning stage of this river valley project, then a number of these problems can be avoided subsequently. This master plan may not be available to the independent producer directly, but the state government with whom they are dealing with, every state government in the state, they are having copy of that. They are the user agency. So with the help of them, they can always consult and take information from them, and they can plan on that. With this, I complete my address. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Singh, and thank you for keeping it short and crisp and to the time. Thank you very much. We now request Mr. S.K. Mahapatro, Member Secretary, NERPC, again to say a few words to us.
Respected Chairman, sir, distinguished delegates and the dais as well as and the audience, good afternoon everybody. Actually my presentation is basically on some issues and constraints in northeastern region, not the entire issue, that is basically related to transmission system more or less, because for past few months I am working in NERPC. Based on that experience I have some observations, so I would like to bring to highlights. My outlines will be all these things, but main focus will be on the transmission system. Generation scenario I think everybody knows. So the entire power system is divided into 5 regions. Northeast is one of the regions. So which has in terms of installed capacity, it is the lowest. Lowest in the sense you can see around the 207 gigawatt is our installed capacity, all India installed capacity, and Northeastern is having only 1%, 1.1%. That is hardly 2.3 gigawatt. So if you see the actually effective installed capacity, it is hardly 125 gigawatt all over India, and for eastern region it is hardly, northeastern region it is hardly 1.7 gigawatt. That means our effective installed capacity is only 60 to 70%. Although total installed capacity is 2.3, but your effective is much lower than what we are seeing the actual figure. Like your all India figure also same thing. It is hardly 125 gigawatt. So hydro and thermal ratios are like that. In the northeastern region, everybody knows it is hydro dominated, so the ratio is naturally more. So if you see the last 5 years export and import of NER, you see then the first 2 years of your last 5-year plan, you are in export mode. But in last 3 years, you are in importing mode. That means there is shortage of power. So actually at present, the restricted demand of NER is around 1500 megawatt of peak and 1800 megawatt is your peak. So after this installation of OTPC generation, we hope that that scenario will change and shortage will be overcome to a great extent. So if you see the transmission system, the entire transmission system we have that is 400 kV, 220 kV, 132 kV. 400 and 220 kV system is mainly by Power Grid, which is the backbone of this transmission system. And 220, 132 of Assam, Meghalaya and Arunachal Pradesh, and the rest of the things are 132 by 33 kV system. So about 132, 135 kV substations are there. So which includes 5 numbers 400 kV and around 220 kV 13 numbers. So this is our entire network. The red line shows the interconnection. If you see our interconnection, these red lines are the interconnection at 400 kV level with other regions. So our northeastern region is connected to the new grid only through eastern grid. We have only one double circuit line at 400 kV level, one 220 kV double circuit line. So there is a limitation also in those lines. You cannot transport or import or export more power. After this grid disturbance, the limitation is 450 to 500 megawatt. Either you can import or you can export. That is the limitation. Although you have only one double circuit line and one single circuit line. So this is what I was telling. Already this interconnection is with the eastern region through Bongaigaon, Siliguri and Biripara, Salagati. This is the existing one. And in the future we will have plus minus 800 kV SVDC, which will connect your Vishwanath Chariali to Agra via Alipurdwar. That is in the process of execution. But then I will come to the straightforward to some of the issues and constraints what I observed in last few months. Actually, all of us know that the entire power system constitutes the generation, transmission, distribution together. So if there is any constraint in any sector, the ultimate sufferer is the consumer. So if you have a problem in transmission, the consumer is sufferer. If there is a generation, distribution anywhere, any sector there is a problem, the ultimate sufferer is your consumer. So you have to design your system, you have to plan it, you have to maintain it also. Again the same thing, if you do not maintain this planning and designing and maintenance is not going together, then again you will have problem. If you have planned it properly but you have not designed it, and if you have designed it, you have not maintained it, then everywhere there will be a constraint. So I will suggest, I think most of these things are known to all of us maybe. So some of these constraints regarding transmission system, if you see, unlike other regions, 132 kV network constitutes the backbone of the transmission system in northern region. But in other region, 220 and 400, 765, even 1200 kV likely to come. Then similarly, and most of the lines, if you will find, 132 kV level is single circuit line. So redundancy level is very low, which is very unusual in other regions. So huge generation addition is expected in few years. So what will happen? You will have transmission. You need associated transmission systems. So Arunachal itself, you will find 37,000 megawatt is there. So that has to be transported because you don't have, if you see, the commensurate load growth is not there in northeastern region. And as per the 17th electric power survey, you will find that it was saying only 23% industrial growth is there, industrial consumption, and 55% is the domestic consumption. Even the industrial consumption is not much. So entire power, whatever will be generated, you have to evacuate to the other regions. So power has to be evacuated to the other regions. So again there is a problem because you have a very limited corridor through which your power has to be evacuated. I will show you. So that's why I am saying the relative constraint for evacuation of power through that chicken neck area. What I mean to say, you see this is your power map, this is your chicken neck area. If you see the northeastern region, there is a small area through which entire line has to pass through. That only 22 kilometer width and 18 kilometer that area through which entire line has to pass through. So you can imagine what sort of problem we have the constraint as far as evacuation also is concerned. Now there is no problem because the generation has not come up. When the generation will come, the constraint you can imagine. So only this much area is left with us through which all the lines has to pass through. So you can see the right of way requirement for all these lines at 800 kV, 400 kV and 220 kV. These are the requirements. You need at least right of way, I mean to say 52 meter you need for 400 kV and 220 kV 35 and 145 27 meter. If you see what I mean by right of way, you just see this much corridor you have to leave for the lines on either side. So you can imagine if it is 52 meter, how much line you need. I will just give you the next slide. You see, if you go for 400 kV line, 3 numbers, then only you can transmit 2000 megawatt. So how much corridor you can imagine? 52 into 52. So instead of that, so it has been planned to go for HVDC line. So even 800 kV HVDC line, number of HVDC lines are in the pipeline proposed to evacuate those powers to the other region only because of this right of way constraint, because only 22 kilometer, 8 kilometer stretch is available to which through which all the lines has to pass through. That is the major constraint you can imagine. So number of 800 kV HVDC are planned to evacuate the power to NER. So HVDC system, one more thing, when you have so many HVDC system, there is also inherent problem with that HVDC system. What I mean to say, when HVDC system operates in monopolar mode, it has to, there is a ground return. So when that ground return current passes through this HVDC monopolar mode, that current will affect your AC system. So all the AC system and nearby substations will also be affected. So we have to be very careful in the nearby substation to take care of these actions when all these HVDC systems come into existence. Then fault level is also likely to increase because number of generations are coming. So the fault level, whatever is existing in your system, it will also go up. So the existing system may not be suitable, all the equipment may not be suitable, whatever is there. So you have to examine all these things. So generation is going on, adding on, but the problem is also adding on onto your system. So those things we have to be very careful. So then over voltage and lighting is a very common phenomenon in northeastern region. So many insulators are failure has taken place. Fortunately, Power Grid has replaced a number of insulators. So now the system has improved to a great extent. Still some work is left out that will be completed in few months, in a year or two. And another thing is that there is frequent transient faults, which is a very common unusual phenomena in other regions. In this region at 132 kV level we have a number of trippings. because of which we have to go for single phase auto reclosing system. So single phase auto reclosing is not common in any other region. This is the only common feature in this northeastern region. So what will happen, the breakers were existing breakers, they are not suitable. So you have to replace them because to meet all these requirements. In the future also you have to take care of all these things. So availability of, then another issue is availability of space near load centers is not there. So you cannot, in the hilly terrain and availability of space is not there. So naturally you have to find out some other solution. You cannot go for conventional substations, you have to go for other alternatives. I have some slides I will just show you. And everybody must be knowing that acidic nature of water is very dangerous for our machines, hydro plants. And that is also creating problem for our generator transfer also. Recently some of the generator transformers also failed because of this acidic nature of the water. So that has to be taken care during design stage. Proper material you have to select for the particular type of for generator as well as for the cooling arrangement of your transformers. So the again that another issue is that the northeastern region comes under seismic zone 5. So when you go for designing your entire system, you have to take care of this thing. These are all inherent constraints, you can say. Some are natural, and these are all inherent, and something are we have to create a constraint, you can say. The HVDC is creating some problem for you, like that. So then one more thing I observe, if you see 132 kV stations, we have number of small transformers we are going on adding. Today we are adding 5, next day 5, 7, then 10, then 12, like that. Instead of going for a single rating of 50 MVA, what is the drawback of this? Because if you go on adding your transformers, your impedance is getting reduced and fault level is increasing at the same substation. Without knowing all these things we are doing. Even in 2 years, 3 years, we are replacing a transformer, adding one more transformer instead of going for a higher rating transformers. So those are some of the issues. Again, then everybody knows that road transport is a major problem. So what difficulty we are facing, you are always have to go for single phase transformers. Even if it is small rating, then you have to go for single phase. So it occupies a lot of space, and that also increases overall cost. That is space requirement, cost, spares, overall maintenance, everything is going up. So you have to, when you go for planning and designing stage, you have to do it properly. Otherwise, the overall cost of the project and actually based on the life cycle cost, we have to plan our system. That I will show some of the plan. So I think already it has been discussed the heavy equipment of OTPC was transported through Bangladesh. So similarly, then I think last one, I think open access and transmission planning is going to be a challenge. Why I am saying? Because all of a sudden utilities they plan to go for short-term purchase. When you go for short-term purchase to meet your load demand, because of load demand is there, you will go for short-term purchase immediately. So there is no planning for this short-term purchase. Your available transmission capacity is being utilized because of this short-term purchase. So that is not taken into care in the planning stage. So that is another issue not only in this region, everywhere that will be a constraint again for transmission system. So all of a sudden you are planning to go for short-term purchase, huge quantum of power. Naturally your transmission system is not planned for that. So you have to plan for that also. So that conclusion I mean to say a lot of development activities are going on. In CA also a lot of transmission system development training schemes are also taken up. So interstate transmission system improvement scheme are also taken up to meet all these transmission constraints. And then the 13th plan, we have number of 400 kV lines likely to come in the region. So after grid disturbance, a lot of things has been decided to take up, like your protection audit, islanding schemes and system protection schemes. All those things have to be in place in the region. But again there is a problem. When you go for implementation of these schemes, because right kind of equipment, right kind of technology is not available, how can you implement? When their telecommunication system is not okay, how can you implement all those things? On paper you can implement, but actually when you go to site, the things are not there. So you have to have a right kind of equipment, right kind of communication network, then only you can implement. But recently we have planned to go for a protection audit. Everything has been finalized. So the entire region, 135 substation will be audited by a group of 4 people. Everything has been planned. In the process we will find out the deficiency in the each substations, so that at least we can come out with a conclusion that these are the deficiency in all these substations. This requires improvement. So then that's what I am saying, the road transport facility and improvement of telecommunication network is a must. Then only we can implement some of the things which we plan. So planning that, then the last thing I would like to say, because when you go for planning, we have to choose the right technology. and not only based on the short-term benefit. We have to go choose a technology which has a life cycle cost. Based on the life cycle cost, you have to choose the technology. So I will show some of the technology and the photographs. These are the technology not very new, old. These are not very year technology which is not available in India. We are adopting all this technology. So these are you can see a 400 kV pipe pole structure. So in Delhi we have used that type of structure where right of way problem is there. So technology option you have to choose properly for overhead line when you find such type of constraints. One of these way of solution for overhead transmission lines, and another you have to go for multi-circuit lines. Then another is you have to go for this one. You can imagine this is a existing system. This is a multi-circuit and multi-voltage. That top one is your 400 kV and bottom one is your 220 kV. Without changing the right of way, the same thing we could manage. That means it was a 220 kV line. You see 220 kV Chupka Valipara line has been upgraded for 400 by 220 kV multi-circuit line. And this is to cross that forest. So wherever we have forest problem, we have to think in this way also, where we can do like that. Although cost will increase, but that way we can avoid a lot of things. You see the right of way was maintained, but still we are able to another 400 kV, and you can see how much power you can transmit. Two 400 kV and two 220 kV lines are there. At least 1500 megawatt power you can transmit over this line, but only one 220 kV line was there within that corridor. So you can do like this also. So you can see the substations. This is a hilly terrain. This is the unfortunate part. We have leveled the land. We have gone for an air insulated substation. But if you go by life cycle cost, then we will never go for this type of substation. We will go for a GIS. These are all conventional substations. You see how much space we are requiring. If you go for a this GIS substation, you can compare how much space you need. Hardly 20% space you require in the same area. This is a AIS substation. You see the available requirement for GIS substation. You see how much you can. This is a 220 kV station. You can put it outside or you can put it inside a building also. So those type of technologies you have to adopt. You have to plan at the initial stage. Unless you plan, then it cannot. Always will go for conventional system. Then it will be very difficult to meet all these constraints. So you see inside the building there is a substation, 400 kV substation. You can imagine this is a 400 kV GIS substation inside this building. So there is, wherever there is a constraint, we have to find out way out. We have to adopt the latest technology available based on the life cycle cost, not on the short term benefit. So again, the hybrid technology is there. I will show you hybrid technology. Basically, the existing substations, existing things which are there, we can upgrade it to next higher voltage wherever it is required. So you see, this is a compact things. So these are the conventional things has been compacted into this. Your breaker has been compacted into a small piece of isolator. All those things, equipment, you can see how they have been compacted into a small space. So ultimately your substation look like this. Nothing is visible. This is a compact substation. This is available up to 220 kV level. So any 132 kV level substation easily can be converted to this at a higher cost. So that then you can see at distribution level also a lot of things can be done. You see the conventional distribution levels here. This is a conventional distribution. The latest available thing you can see is the same thing. You can put it in a box. Entire transformer and protection devices, everything is there. Nothing is visible. So it is so aesthetically it is also good. It is well protected. Everything, anywhere you can put it, and how much time it will take? It takes hardly 1 or 2 days for erection and commissioning. So those type of technology you have to think of. So another latest technology, what is we are saying about the transmission system, the technology of the alternative to overhead lines and underground cables. So now you can this is overhead line is going on the top. You see the same voltage level. The gas insulated line is under the bottom at the lower level. So instead of cable, you can go for this type of technology, particularly in hydro stations where you are using cable for from generator to potted yard. So that number of cables will be reduced. Where you are using cables in parallel, in that case you can go for this GIL technology, gas insulated transmission line, in which the gas is SF6 20% and your nitrogen is 80%. Those type of technology you have to think when we are going for planning and designing stage. So this is another view. So ultimately I mean to say we have to go for a technology. So number of solutions are available like pole type structure, multi-circuit, multi-voltage transmission line, compact substation, hybrid and GIL technology, and this compact secondary substation at distribution level can provide solution to many problems. So we have to plan, we have to design, and based on, always I again repeat, we have to plan and design based on life cycle cost, not on the short term benefits. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Roy Mohapatra, for your very exhaustive presentation. I wish we had more time. You've given us a lot of ideas about from the technical side, how to design a substation, how to design a distribution station for new technologies. Thank you very much. I mean, those of you who are interested can have a talk with him during the lunch period or maybe after the conference is over. Thank you very, very much. We would now request Mr. Ashim Deb, Senior Manager Civil NIPCO, to say a few words. Before he comes and speaks, is Mr. Patir here? Mr. Patir of Power Grid Corporation? Mr. A. Patir? Is he here? Mr. Patir, are you here anywhere? All right. After his talk, we will end this session and we'll break for lunch. I can't restrict the lunch time. It was 1 hour, we can't give 1 hour. So maybe we come back within 45 minutes or so, because we have 2 more sessions to continue.
Respected chairperson of the session, other distinguished panelists, audience, press, invitees, guests, and ladies and gentlemen. Actually, I understand very well that how difficult it is for me to retain your attention to what I say, and it is as good as me to keep focus on what I am going to say, because it's already late. My job has been made easier, in fact, by my previous speaker, Mr. G.K. Singh from Brahmaputra Board, because I am also going to speak on downstream impacts of hydel projects and their available mitigation measures. But before I proceed with the presentation, I just wanted to tell you something, that I took this subject for discussion because I think we need to know what exactly are the downstream impacts, that there are rising protests and concerns, whether they pose threats to the environment, of which human beings are the most important constituent. We leave with you to ponder upon. In a country like ours, where per capita power availability is very poor, where 30 crores of people have no access to power, where people have to go to nearby towns and other villages to charge their mobile. Under such situation, I understand, to stop hydro projects coming up on some issues which other infrastructure projects also do have is a luxury. So now, as the time is very much limited, I would request you to be on your toes to keep pace with me, because I am just going to run with the presentation. So these are the presentation outlines. Introduction I have covered already, but then I said that availability of electricity improves the pace of industrialization. Our country, the industrializations are basically concentrated in few cities, because power is available there. That's the reason. And reliable power. On the contrary, the critique of dam construction and its social and environmental impacts, including the ones faced on the downstream, has only increased over time. Though the criticism sometimes appear overinflated, the part of which is valid must be absorbed and dealt with effectively right from the planning stage. Now, these downstream impacts are not general. These are project specific, depending on the type, size, the flow pattern of the river upon which this is being built, and other topographical characteristics. Now, based on the literature available in the public domain, I have prepared this presentation before you for discussion. There are basically 4 kinds of impact: geomorphologic, hydrologic, ecological, and social. Geomorphic are those basically which are the physical deformities experienced by the riverbed downstream because of the regulated release and your fluctuation in the river levels resulting to your bank erosion and all. And this riverbed aggradation, which is rising in the riverbed level in the downstream, further downstream of the dam, these constitute your geomorphic impacts. I think if there be no dam at all, even then we come across this sort of geomorphic phenomena which is unique to the nature. So there is nothing that we really relate this to the dam. Then there are some hydrological impacts which is called, one is stratification, because in the reservoir the velocity is low, the upper layer of the water absorbs more heat, while down below the temperature is less, oxygen is less. When it is released through your turbine, they tend to affect the aquatics, but over time these new conditions, the aquatic lives come to live with it, adjust their conditions with it. So again I say, this is also, we find the same phenomena in natural lakes, sea. So this is nothing new to these aquatic animals. Supersaturation, this is again also a concentration of nitrogen in water when it spills over spillway. Now these conditions which occur over a spillway crest, this is not quite unnatural. This is also naturally occurring, where turbulences, eddies, they form, they absorb more nitrogen, and the aquatic lives, they live with it. They, over the period of time, of course, they learn to live with this, change scenarios. Sedimentation, together with the nutrients, get trapped behind the dam. So what happens is, in the downstream, sedimentation flow, load is less, and for which these aquatic lives, they get less nutrients. But further downstream, when the river is joined by many tributaries, this problem is overcome. Erosion, Mr. G.K. Singh has covered already. Environmental flow release, here I will take 1 minute or so. Now see, the policy regime in the country, the Government of India, Ministry of Environment and Forest, they have recognized that of course there are certain adverse impacts, and in consideration of that, now they have come up, of course not now exactly, for the last 10 years or so, that these hydro projects have mandatorily have to release environmental flow, and this ranges from 10% to 20% of the average lean season flow. The upper limit I am not sure, though I have written 20%, but in one of the projects of NIPCO, there is PARE, the MOEF has recommended release of 10% of the lean season flow as an environmental flow, which as a matter of fact will take care of so many downstream problems, which a section of the people, NGOs, some NGOs of course, critics, they heavily emphasize upon. These mitigation measures are available because of course I understand by going by your face that we are all hungry. I am hungry myself. So I am skipping this, but there are measures for these hydrological impacts. Ecological impacts, fish passage, wildlife fish passage gets blocked by a dam, and this has been overcome by the provision of fish ladder, where this migration of the fish who tend to go from downstream to the upstream or upstream to downstream has been taken very well care of. Not only that, this fish ladder has taken care of the environmental flow problem as well. Wildlife, as is with the aquatic life, wildlife also over a period of time, they get adjusted themselves with the change scenario, change environment. And this is nothing new. This cannot be simply, I cannot say that the dam has caused this and that. This is the natural thing. Nature has its own medicine also. So And a few mitigation measures, I said already, fish ladders, there are surface collectors, spill deflectors, hatches. When fish is adversely affected, the user agency, I mean the developer of the project, what they do is they come up with fisheries, hatcheries, and they grow the fish in abundance and release them back in the river. Social impact, well, in the downstream of a dam, and we have seen, this is quite common with us, that there are encroachment in the floodplains of a river where they do cultivate certain crops, mostly rabi crops. So what happens is, when there is a dam, these medium floods, which carry sediment to those banks and facilitate a condition where this agriculture is, very convenient, these get lost. But if you see the vast benefits that arises out of irrigation and flood prevention aspects of large dams, it really outweighs this social impact. Now, in the conclusion, I say that all human development activities have positive and negative aspects and impacts. So do hydropower projects. Like a road, this Trans-Arunachal Highway, this Mahashara Canal, they also need farmlands. They have taken agricultural land, forest land, as a matter of fact. But why people are not opposed to it? Because they can associate themselves with this kind of infrastructure. On the contrary, electricity is an entity which does not have which is not physical, which I cannot relate to easily. Particularly this is so with the rural populace. They have lived without electricity for decades, for generations. They easily recognize themselves with the river, the forest, the wildlife, but not with the electricity. But they run to the cities to take the benefit of the electricity. That is what I wanted to mean, that all development activities have their own merits and demerits. So do the hydropower projects. As I said, hydropower projects have in fact many direct positive impact. They are important sources of clean, renewable, cheap and environmental friendly energy, unlike coal and oil. Here I would say that, I'm sure everybody is aware of that. Nowadays we import coal, gas, oil from outside countries because we cannot, from our own sources, we cannot meet the demand. And in doing so, we are spending very valuable foreign exchanges. And by doing so, we have dented our economy so much so that today our credibility is the least in the among the developing countries, the BRICS countries. Fiscal deficit is increasing. So we need hydropower because the fuel is natural. It is flowing down to the river. We should tap it as much as possible. Before I conclude, because I had lot many things to share with you because of the misperception of so many people regarding these downstream impacts, I wanted to share our experience that we had with our Ranganadi project. This is a ROR project, run of the river project, with a very little pondage of 5.7 million meter cube. Okay. Now this reservoir capacity gets filled up within a period of 3 to 4 hours by average, inflow in the river. Now, if I could take you to a situation where what we come across in our daily life, suppose there is a bucket with a tap in the middle, which will act as a outflow to the machine, and the tap above the bucket, which supplies the municipal water. Now, suppose this tap supplying the municipal water is a river. If the discharge from this tap above is more than the tap on the bucket, which is discharging to the machine, then there will be build up in the bucket, And very soon, the bucket will get filled up and there will be overflow. So the functioning of a reservoir is something like that. After a point, the reservoir, in case of ROR of course, it has no capacity to retain the incoming flow. Whatever it comes, it has to go out. Now, the channel conditions down below is not impacted by its release only. Because over a period of time, the channel capacity has gone down because of illegal encroachment of the floodplains, the bed aggradation, and so many other conditions. And of course, in the downstream, there are so many tributaries they join. Particularly in our project, we have seen that many tributaries has joined in the downstream, which have a large flow in the case of a heavy downpour, because they do not have the type of concentration. So they really empty out their entire discharge in the downstream, and so that there is a flash flood in the plains around North Lakhimpur. Anyway, thankfully, unfortunately, we could convince the people of Assam, affected people. Now they know that this project is no more. I mean, this project is not responsible for the floods they face, because flood was happening before, flood is happening after also. The dam has got to do nothing. The intensity and frequency have gone up, but this is only because of the, the channel that have undergone these physical deformations. Like I have said, the barns, they are 50 years old. So that's the thing. Before I finish, may I say that we the human being, are the best creatures on earth. So we do deserve to lead a quality life, which is not possible without power. So let us understand that and not overinflate the impact of hydro projects on ecosystem, as the benefits outnumbers the impact. Thank you, the organizers of this conference, and the audience in particular, for the patient hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dev. I think we spent last almost 1.5 hours in going through all the issues, which are the challenges faced in timely completion of hydropower projects. And I'd like you to join me in thanking all those distinguished speakers in the panel for the session.